So continuing on, we're going to go ahead and take a look at the material editor. And this is this icon right here that'll be installed most likely on your desktop when you install Maxwell Render. We're going to go ahead and open that up. And the first thing you see isn't all that impressive. It's a bunch of gray. The very first thing I want you to notice is that there are two tabs up here. The first tab is Editor, and the second tab is Browser. And Browser is going to allow us to browse our material library. And you can see by default we open in our Maxwell material library that's installed with Maxwell when we install the program. And you can see there's a bunch of materials that are already created here. So we can open up any of these and look at them. So I'm going to go ahead and open this concentric material right here. Now we see stuff over here in our editor tab that makes a lot more sense to us. First of all, we see a larger material preview, which is very useful. And we also see some information about what type of layers are involved in this particular material. We see some information about how this material was constructed. And we see up here we have File, Edit, Preview, and Wizards, as well as a Save button. What I would say about this is, when we're dealing with our Maxwell materials, there's some very important preferences that we want to set up before we really get into the meat and potatoes of creating new materials or modifying existing materials. And we're going to go to File, Preferences right here. This Maxwell scheme, that's no big deal. If you want to customize your colors, you can. I don't really find out to be all that big of a deal. Do not show material performance warnings. I recommend keeping this unchecked. Under materials, it's going to give us a choice of where we want to actually pull our materials from. So if you have different folders where you're keeping materials for different reasons, or maybe you have a network where you have different material folders, you can set those up so that it will automatically find your material textures for you, which we'll get more into later. We also have this MXM Gallery, which is an online gallery, which we'll go into in more detail later on. But the idea being is that you have a huge library of materials that are at your disposal for free that were uploaded by other users as well as staff members of NextLimit. And what you need to do is you need to go to the MXM Gallery, and you need to create a username and a password and then put those in this field. And when you do that, what will happen is you'll then be able to go from the browser directly over to the MXM Gallery and download whatever material you're interested in straight from within this material editor, as well as within Studio. This final one is the one where I want to set some settings. The very first thing I find that sampling level 10 is way, way too low. And because we can stop our preview renders at any time, I like to set my sampling level very high. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and set mine for 20. And then I'm also going to set my time for something really absurdly high as well, something like 300 seconds, which would be 5 minutes. And I'm going to leave the scale set to 100. And this last one here is very, very important. I don't understand why in the world anybody would want to not use RS1 engine for material preview. What this is basically saying is that if we don't check this box, we're going to be using a render engine that's not our final render engine in order to view our material, which makes absolutely no sense to me. I mean, it may be a little bit faster, but the bottom line is it's not going to look like our final material is actually going to look in our final render, so what's the point? So me, I'm of a mind where I want the best possible preview, and I'm willing to pay a little penalty for that. If you have a fast computer, something that's relatively modern, you really won't find this to be that big of a deal. However, if you're on a really slow machine, then you might want to turn that off just to make things a little easier for yourself. I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. And what that'll allow me to do when I'm talking about all these preview things is, you see this little sort of green arrows that looks like a recycle symbol? What that's doing is it's actually going to allow me to render a preview for this. Before I get too far into that, let me show you that under this preview list item, you can see that we have our select a scene, and we can choose from many different scenes, and we can make our own. Right now, what we're actually looking at was rendered in stage 1. So I'll choose a different one. I'll choose stage 2 so you can see what this looks like. And now I'm just going to go ahead and hit this little green refresh symbol here, and we'll see the render engine start. So as you can see, it is now rendering, and is rendering that preview on this particular geometry, which is different from the geometry that you previously saw. And we can render that on many different pieces of geometry. So the very first one I'll do here is I'll do something like, say, drapery. That'll really show a different look. So you can see how useful this is, having these different previews. It allows you to really get an idea of what this material is going to look like on many different substances. And of course, like I said, you can create your own preview scenes. These are basically mini Maxwell renders. Now, one thing I should point out to you is that you won't have those preferences that we just set kick in until we restart the material editor. So let me just go ahead and close this out. And we're going to discard those changes because we don't need them. And then we're going to restart our material editor. And I'll just go right over to the browser and I'll grab that concentric again. And I'll choose a preview, select scene for, oh heck, let's do floor. I like floor, so we'll do floor. And I'm going to go ahead and hit render. Now we're seeing a different preview again. Now notice here that we have 297 seconds to go on this. This is a lot of time. And we may not need all that time for this particular render. Well, if at any point in time we decide that we don't want to continue this rendering process to get a very finished, polished preview, we can simply click on this icon again, and that will go ahead and stop the render. Now, sometimes it may take a few seconds to stop the render, and the reason why is because it's still cycling through whatever sampling level that it's at, and that won't make an awful lot of sense right now, but it'll make more sense later on as we get more and more into the guts of Maxwell. But for right now, I just wanted you to understand some of the basic things that we're going to be working with when we come back to materials.